sour gas well, so it was not producible. So now that had sort of sterilized the whole acreage. So we had developed a different theory about why that had occurred, and a different theory about why some of that other part of that acreage would be anomalously good. And so we did a ton of really good technical work to convince ourselves of that, and then we had to sort of step out and believe that the story was true, right? So you're never going to get the flashiest, shiniest asset. You're going to get the one that has everybody's written off for whatever reason. So yeah, I think it takes courage, and then I think in that first year it took a lot of patience, because we went for over a full year evaluating asset after asset, and there was one that we basically started the company just in particular to get that asset, and then the entanglements were, the asset was great, but it came with too much baggage, and so we had to walk away. So like through that year, you do have moments where you're thinking like, how long do we go? Will we ever find the right fit? So I'd say as we got towards sort of like that 1 year time scale, it started to be like, okay, are we going to find something, and how long will we be able to go until we do?
So let's back up a bit.
Yeah.
So you said that you joined this group who had successfully maybe started and sold an oil and gas business.
Yes.
And you got invited to participate in their next deal.
Yeah. And I didn't know any of them.
You didn't know any of them?
No. So, and the person who recommended me was not someone I'd ever worked with, but I think like over the years I had developed a really good reputation and a lot of success at the larger companies that I'd been at. So it was sort of an old university friend, but yeah, we had never worked together. But yeah, that you can't underestimate your reputation and then also your network, because I think those two things were critical in me being invited into this next round. Yeah.
So your reputation, someone from the network, not someone you've been actively working with in your recent past.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gave your name to some group of strong operators.
Yeah.
And they invited you, hey, we want to do this next deal.
Yeah.
Come and join us.
I think our sector is like oil and gas in Calgary is quite small, right? So everybody knows everybody, and they will hear of you multiple ways from multiple people. So yeah, I think
but all this was happening at a time when the oil and gas sector was down, right? So macro for that industry was significant.
Horrible.
It was
horrible. It was terrible. Yeah.
Okay.
Like I would say, like there have been so many layoffs. I'd say half of my friends that I graduated with from university were laid off. Like even moving from a very secure job where I had I've had lots of seniority to go do this and also take like a reduced salary for that year that we were self-funding felt like at the time a pretty big risk. But sometimes you get to the point where you're sort of like, you feel like you need to take that next step. Like not taking the shot felt like it would have been harder than taking it at that point. Like, I think because I was feeling like I want to give it a try.
So you were living a secure job at a point when everybody was being laid off. You were not.
Yes.
You stepped out of your comfort zone to
Exactly.
go do a startup.
And it was funny, I remember after that, because decisions after that got easier. Once you've kind of taken a really big one, then it starts to kind of allow you to kind of be bolder after that, I found. So, yeah.
Okay, so you did this very bold thing, left your job, joined the startup.
Yeah.
So, and for 1 year, you guys didn't get any assets.
Right. Yeah. We were like renting offices by the individual office. We were just looking at asset after asset, and we had talked to some private equity firms, but we did it very backwards. It's I would say fairly unusual in oil and gas. Normally you get your funding and then you start looking for your asset. We did it the other way around, where we found our asset and then we talked to some people, but then we had really to rush to make this bid deadline, of course, that they had. And then Hurricane Harvey hit right as our plane was in the air to go to Houston, and so the whole deal had to be done when Houston was their knees in water and boarding their houses up, but that did become the theme where, COVID, and you're kind of like, if there wasn't a crisis of some sort, then it wasn't the norm, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, did you say something about businesses that are born in the winter? They turn out to be great businesses. Businesses that start in the winter of the economic cycle usually are great businesses.
Yes.
But then they create comfortable people.
Yeah.
Who then break it up, and then
Yeah.
there's another winter.
Yeah.
So I guess.
You get very resilient businesses.
Yes.
You get the opportunity to buy assets that you wouldn't otherwise be able.
Mhm.
Assets are cheaper. Like I found we could get staff, because some really good people have been laid off, so I could get like 3-day-a-week staff, for instance. I never would have been able to do that in a normal time. We were super cheap office space. There was lots of things like, and I think you do make a very resilient group. Like I just saw a chart this week that was like, now for the assets, Montney, like all the really popular assets in Canada, you're starting to have to pay more and more and more for these assets. So yeah, I think those headwinds can be a good opportunity as well.
Right, it can be a good opportunity when you have dry powder.
Yes.
That's talking about liquidity, right?
Yes.
The reason you have a season like that is because liquidity is rising, right?
Exactly.
So in the face of a very disfavorable time for the oil and gas industry in Wall Street, capital allocators were disallocating monies to that industry.
Yes.
And you were about to deploy a startup in that space.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you navigate? How did you come about even getting those calls, getting those doors open to you?
I think there was a huge advantage in their previous exit, right? Because once you had one, people will generally, and I think it would have been any other time, we would have a lot more to choose from. So, we had, I think probably we had to take maybe more conditions that we didn't particularly love, right? You have to get, and then we also, even to get the deal with the company that we were buying the asset from, we had to get pretty creative on that deal too. And that actually became a theme through that company, because we did, I think one of the reasons for our success is we did a lot of very creative deals with companies who generally, like very, very large companies who generally did not do deals on any of that stuff. And so, we got really strong relationship building, and then also just really super creative things like overrides and stuff like that, just super creative things to sort of, and then I think we haven't talked about this yet, but we were kind of like technically leading edge as far as, we were doing record-setting amount of industry fracking and 100% water recycling. So we were doing technical things that other companies wanted to learn from and get the data from. So that also, I think, provided us some leverage. It was like, hey, partner up with us on this, and then you'll get the information on this. And there was a ton of value in that as well.
So I guess that speaks to the second factor of starting a business. Like have a great idea. And then do it differently.
Yes.
So you're saying that the difference that your team was deploying to the market was cutting edge technology.
Exactly.
Apart from a track record.
Yes.
Positive track record.
Yes.
But you did have a good technology that the industry was hungry for.
Exactly.
Right?
Like we kind of believed that we could have more successful, like people were not doing the intensity of completions that were required for that formation. And then even water recycling, I think actually became quite a big thing too, because other large companies were just not doing that. And then when we exited, that was like a pretty attractive to have sort of an ESG component of the deal as well. So, yeah.
So what about are you able to share some of the creativity that you guys, anyone, maybe,
like on the deal side?
On the deal side, in getting the bit of the larger owners to work with you and sell you an asset that makes sense.
Yeah, I think like there was like land kind of comes close to expiry, so you can kind of go, hey, we will help you keep your land by drilling a well either right beside you or in your land. So, and that's very commonly done. I think the overrides was probably really unique because it was like, don't worry, you're not gonna give up too much. You're still, if we get a good well, I always say ideal should feel really good almost, like it should be mutually beneficial. And I think there was also became that level of trust, like our technical teams worked together really well. We sort of were really proactive in sharing information, so they didn't have to come asking for it. Could we also use some of their technical expertise? So really making it feel like it was a full partnership, because sometimes you can do these, like especially big companies, they don't want to not be the operator of the well, and so that they really don't want to. But we also had developed, I think, a really good reputation as an operator in that area. So I think combining all of those things is sort of what made it successful.
Was luck did it feature?
Luck always does. No one wants to say that, but it really is
Tell
true,
me about luck.
Yeah. Well, I think like on our third company, we had a completely sort of new play. And then we were thinking of that maybe the time was right to start going up for sale, but we weren't quite there yet. But then one of our competitors quite far south had drilled a well into that same thing. And none of the information was released, but we kind of had a good idea that they didn't want anyone, like that it was going to be good. So then it was kind of like, you didn't think the timing was now, but now the timing, like now it is the time. And so then you hustle, right? So that's luck too, like completely luck, right? That you can just kind of go, okay, I just noticed that, that little dot on the map further south, and so it's that sometimes it's that kind of luck too. And I think knowing when to exit is a really important skill, and it's a really hard thing because it's easy to want to hang on, I think, too long. I think that's probably I think the timing is really tough, and being able to sort of like know when to let go. And then I think the other thing, and because I've evaluated many, little startup assets, I think also it's easy, like in our industry, to kind of keep doing the same thing. You've drilled one well, it worked here, it might be sour down there, but you don't really want to go do that because it's really risky. But I think staying in one spot, like stepping out and proving the whole thing, even though you'd be making a lot more cash flow if you were staying in the same spot, I think that's critical. And then I think when we were looking at assets, we were really clear that we wanted to be able to have free cash flow. I believe it was like in 3 years. So it had to be a really quick, a fairly quick turnaround, pretty aggressive. But we were pretty confident that we needed to be free cash flow or very close to by the time we wanted to exit too.
So did you have the asset for 3 years?
I think no, it was longer than that. So it ended up being longer, of course. But I think it ended up like from 2016 till 2021 or something. So more like 5.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And then you talk about timing the exit. And how time really factors strongly into luck, right?
Yeah. And then there's all the unknowns in there, right? COVID, gas prices go so low that you are now, even though lots of it's hedged, you're still paying to get rid of some of your stuff. And so you're kind of riding all this, but I think there's gonna always be stuff that comes up that was not planned, right? So.
Yeah, so when, I know that if we will come back and talk about the team, because the team is so important when it comes to, executing and operating anything successfully, right? So we'll come back a bit to the team dynamics.
Yeah.
I want to talk a bit about, choosing the exit, right? Because there are times when multiples just compress, right? And you don't know ahead of time, are you going to get 2x, 3x, or
you don't know
what multiple will you get for your whatever industry you're in, or whatever, right? And then there are times when the macros are great and multiples are expanding and you really will attract huge valuation.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what was your experience with that?
I think, I mean, it was kind of like we got the call during Christmas holidays and all of a sudden, like, private equity guys wanted me for sale on the first Monday after Christmas holidays, kind of like, it was like immediate. So I think it was just sort of like a number of sort of quiet inbounds made them kind of go, these big guys are interested for whatever reason right now. So that I think that was the biggest thing. Then now was the time to go. And we had drilled a number of wells that hadn't come on yet. So like, it was kind of like, maybe we should wait a little bit longer. And I think we were close to free cash flow, but not quite. But I think it was those inbounds that sort of pushed us over the edge. And you don't want to lose that kind of, you don't want to lose those. So yeah.
And so would you say, looking back, would you say it was a great time?
The best of times, and it was the worst of times. I think most people who've done startups would probably say the same thing. Like it's like a roller coaster, and I think like most of the personalities that go into this like enjoy it most of the time. But the lows were pretty low. We had some technical failures that were not our fault, but really could have ended the whole thing before we'd gotten very far. We had a well come in sour, which money-wise was huge. It's one of the, I think.
How huge was that one?
Like, I don't know, by the end of it, I mean, it was probably over $10 million. Like, it was a lot. And then, and you've now kind of also sterilized a big part of your acreage, right? What was so there was that. Then even just, first of all, we're in a play that requires a lot of capital and has a high risk. The wells are very expensive. You're drilling pad wells, so you can easily be into the 10s, 20s, 30s, millions just on individual pads. And then sometimes while you're drilling, you lose a well. And so, but then we saw that our competitor put out in their corporate presentation that they were losing one in every 6. So we were like, okay, well, we're not doing so bad, but it's painful when it's your own money, and it's painful when you don't have, unlimited deep pockets. So I think like it took a lot of courage to be in a play that was pretty high risk and also just very expensive to develop. So yeah.
So I wanted to just like read a bit more about, because now you talked about some of the challenges, right?
Yeah.
You had a breakthrough in identifying an asset.
Yes.
Just by seeing it done.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was your brilliance. I mean, as the GMG lady in the group, right?
Yeah.
The one.
Yeah.
So when you had the bad experience, was that your fault?
Oh, no.
Okay.
But yeah.
Right, because this ties into the dynamics, right?
Yes.
Amongst the team, the personality mix and all of that.
Yeah.
And leadership and management styles.
Those things can be good for you they can be good for your group, right? Because it's easy to get too cocky. I mean, we became very careful about our drilling, our operations, everything. Like, we didn't take anything for granted after that. And so, so I think even though it was terribly painful at the time, I think it did help make a team that, and then also you've kind of had to navigate out of some really bad situations. And so you've kind of got people with that grit to go, okay, this looks really bad. How can we mitigate this? How can we, how can we pivot? How can we, so you're, again, it kind of builds resilience. I would not want to do it again like that, but you never choose those things, but they do sort of like grow you as a team, I think. And I think some good did come out of those things for sure.
Yeah. So when your group reached out to you at the beginning of this and say, hey, we want to work on this, I want you to join the team.
Yeah.
How did you process that?
Yeah.
You know, how did you process, I know, yes, you wanted a startup, maybe, you know, but how did you process that this is a good team to go throw in your hat? Because you were living a paid job. And it was bad times, you know, economically and for firms. How did you process, would I be able to work successfully with this team? Or was that not even a consideration for you?
It was a consideration because you were like working really closely in pretty stressful situations for a potentially really long time. So that's the other thing in startups. It's not like you can leave if you don't like it. You were very stuck in it together, right? So those personality things were really critical. I think knowing that they had had a really great exit previously to me was, I probably wouldn't have gone with a team of people I didn't know if they hadn't had that. And then I met with each of them almost sort of individually. And then I was still undecided, so then I remember they offered to like, okay, meet with another one of the guys. So, and then, I just, again, this industry is fairly small, so you sort of ask around and then you just go for it. So, yeah.
So there was no, I know some people do what they call personality fit analysis.
No.
So you just trusted your gut.
Yes. And wasn't always perfect, right? Personality wise, but yeah.
Were you the only female in the group?
Yes. At the time. So, but I mean, often in oil and gas, you're kind of used to that anyway. And then, although, like, I would say in like private equity startups, there it was very clear that like I think I could probably, that on the technical teams, on the technical executive side, I don't know that there was hardly any females that I met with over the years. So, but yeah, it was something I was already very used to, completely normal.
So how did when the time came, in fact, before we get there, in the course of going through the journey of developing that, did you have any experience where you were spending endless hours at work just grinding, or what would you say is the most difficult part of operating, starting and executing around the startup?
That's a good question. I mean, I think when you're in the beginning, your geologist is doing a ton of the work because you're having to do technical evaluations. This all kind of comes to you at the beginning. And then not knowing if you're being too pessimistic, if you're the reason that you're not getting anything because you're not seeing it optimistically enough. Like, your job is to sort of be hard on these assets because you want to make sure that you can make money when you get them, but you also have to be able to see the opportunities there, right? So, I think that first year was really tough that way because you're not sure, if you're gonna get anything, and if you're being too hard on these things, and if your technical evaluations are correct. And then I think, some of the technical challenges and keeping your costs down, all that stuff, I think was like really difficult. So I'd say those two things.
It's really hard to start.
Would
you want to do this again?
$1 million question, hey? I think once I had done those two, I was really like, I could feel that I was like, I need a break. And I think never say never. I'm like really enjoying this pivot to carbon capture and kind of all the learnings that are coming with that. So never say never, but who knows? There's
What did you find to be, what was your experience working with a private equity partner? Because the culture in private equity, it's different.
It's different.
It's a different. I know there are a few private equity guys in the room here, but it's a different culture,
It
right?
is a different
So
culture.
what was your experience?
And it was very new to me.
It was new to you, okay.
One thing about our private equity funders, they had a really big, very strong technical team. So it almost became like a full extension. Like I was often the only geologist, or, wasn't like I had much technical help on the technical side. So having that was really great. And I was actually quite surprised by how much technical rigor they wanted and by the questions they would ask. So I think I was like surprised by that, but it was great for us because, you had to have your technical really solid for this group. And then, negotiating with them was tricky, right? And again, I think you had to get really creative and be very patient and sort of compromise a lot. So that was a big learning, I think, just sort of understanding. I mean, the other guys, of course, had experience. Well, I think they were actually public in the company before us. But yeah, just kind of like learning to navigate how that looked was tricky for sure. Yeah.
So what did you find that they were excessively demanding, or or that, because it's both, there's also a silent psychological component,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
If you always have to be the one that says, okay, I yield.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I yield.
Yeah.
Even if you thought you had maybe superior judgment or argument in some cases.
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, I mean, they first of all sort of stuck by us when we had that technical thing, and not all groups would have.
No.
Right?
No.
So you don't take that for granted.
Yeah.
And then, like.
Were you the only oil and gas?
We were their only Canadian. Like they have a huge portfolio of companies, but we were their only Canadian asset. And so I'm trying to think. Yeah, can you like expand on the question?
I was interested in learning that, because when you said you had to be creative, you're working with them, and then you had to compromise a lot,
right?
And I was wanting to have us understand, what the dynamics underneath all of that was like, and how did it come about? What effect did it have, psychologically on you? What effect did it have, in forging or transforming your leadership style? You know, what did you take away from the experience of that?
I think
interaction.
I think sometimes you think you're going to have a little more say than you do, right? Because they've put a number of people on your board, and so sometimes. And then I think like hedging was a good example where we did not want to hedge at the number that they had set out, and that was one thing where it's just like you pretty much have to kind of hedge when they say hedge. So and so there's some things that you can compromise on, and then there are some things that you can't. And then I'd say kind of like the final exiting was tricky. So I think I always say like we should take more sort of human psychology courses for anyone at university, because I think it's really like critical to understand how people are thinking and what everybody wants, and kind of eventually coming to that answer. And I do think, like, from what I've heard, I think the US private equity companies are different than the Canadian ones. So yeah, there was some things that I think we probably had to compromise more than we would have liked, but that's sort of, and again, that's part of getting capital when there's no capital available, right? So yeah, I think it just becomes part of the deal.
Yeah, and then again, of course, it's always important to know that when you get money from private equity, they come into the deal being sure about how they're going to get out of it.
Exactly. Of course, right?
Like they come in having strategized and formulated their way to where is the exit in this operation. Whereas you, as an entrepreneur, you are gonna build it, you're gonna develop strategies, you're gonna keep expanding it, you know,
Yeah.
so there's that, right?
Yeah.
You are not looking for exit, you came in so that you can grow a phenomenal, large, you know,
Exactly.
strong entity, but
Yeah.
they came in just so they can, they're passing through.
Yeah.
And they want to pass through successfully.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they'll also sort of like guide you when you might hang on too long or when you might, right? They've done this before,
Yeah,
right? So,
Yeah.
and sometimes you have to go, they're seeing a lot more than I am.
Yeah.
They've done this a lot, so
right, right.
you've got to use those expertise too, right? So,
Right,
Yeah.
exactly, because
Yeah.
that kind of mentality, you know, just following the math. Where is the math? Where
Yeah.
does the math lead to? Where is it cutting through? You know, it's very methodical, it's very mathematical, right?
Yes.
You know, it's
Yeah.
not an art.
And we get emotional, right? Because this is our project, this is our company. Like, I'd say, especially with our last, you know, we were sort of intertwined. Our third company was sort of intertwined with our first because we were sort of funded by the shares of the previous, the purchase of the previous company. And so I really believed in this play, but we couldn't really fund it the way we needed to. So I had to like hand it over. It was kind of like handing over your baby before you're ready to do it. But if you just aren't equipped to do it the way you need to, and you also just need to accept that this is as far as you can take, you know, it's time to let it go kind of thing. So yeah, and I think that was one of the challenges we had too, where we were sort of, you know, funded by the shares of Whitecap who had bought us, and then we didn't have any control over what price those shares would get sold. So that was frustrating because, you know, private equity had their idea of what they wanted, and we just, I think, wanted to make sure that we got out with something. So, and like, oil and gas prices were very rocky during that period. So that part I think was tricky, but you know, it worked out and we navigated it. And again, required a lot of patience. So yeah.
So, yeah, oil prices tend to be rocky a lot.
Yeah.
You know, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
That's one of the most, I mean, someone said, oil and gas, if you do it right, you will come out on top.
Really?
Or you don't agree?
Well, no, I was talking to somebody from capital markets the other day, and he was like, man, someone's got to put like list together of how many actually exit successfully on small.
Oh.
So he and I would agree, you just don't hear about them, I think,
Mhm.
right? We hear about the successes, but we don't hear about the failures. So he's like, I don't think anyone's really put that together, but it would be, yeah, I don't know that that's the case. I think it's a pretty difficult.
How successful was the exit?
So on like a total, like I'm actually not totally sure because like they ended up selling the share. We we personally exited before they sold the shares, but you know they had wrote up those shares at least double. So it was like it did, you know, hanging on to those worked out, did actually really help and worked out really well. So yeah, but I don't know what the final number ended up being.
Yeah, it's not public.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
So when you went into that experience,
Yeah.
versus now, you know, how would you describe your personal leadership style?
Yeah, like you kind of feel like you're a different person when you come out the other side, right?
Mhm.
Like I think like I learned a lot from the other guys. Like, you know, we had one guy who was very careful and very strategic, whereas I usually just come out and say what I I'm very direct, I say what I think. And so just learning from him, especially that sort of like quiet, patient, strategic, you know, really thoughtful, slow down, I think for me was the biggest thing. Like, I think just being a little more constrained as far as that stuff went, I think. And yeah, I think you sort of, you come out of there more cynical or more, I think maybe so, right? Where you're like, you know more of what can go wrong than you did when you started, right? So yeah, I think those
Yeah,
would be,
that would
yeah,
tend to silver you up.
yes, yeah,
And cause you to be more constrained.
exactly, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So, before we move to the other side and
Yeah.
talk about, all the interesting stuff you're doing right now.
Yeah.
Because that is a very
Yeah.
interesting conversation to be
Yeah.
had, right? What would you say to a young person
Yeah.
listening, right?
yeah,
Who maybe is a Googler or
yeah,
maybe is doing a postgraduate degree or
Yeah.
a graduate degree and
Yeah.
it's like burning to get in the
Yeah.
field and say, hey, I want to, I want to start something.
yeah,
Because the age to start a business, succeed in it, and exit at with phenomenal success continues to just come down,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Every day we see, in the tech space,
totally,
there
yeah,
are amazing successes.
Yeah.
22-year-olds, 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
That have built phenomenal businesses,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So what would you say, would be your suggestions
Yeah.
regarding here's how to look at for what? And
Yeah.
here's how to combine it. And,
yeah, like I think your ability to kind of grind at that age is big, so I think go do that, right? Like for me, obviously, like I think spending all that time in like companies that were offering really good training was really helpful, so if you can do that even for a couple of years, I don't think in our industry, training's not nearly as good as it used to be because there's just less capital for that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it's like building that network is huge. Building that reputation and that network is huge. Like I was talking with a junior the other day, and she had started when her company was completely remote too, right? And I think you need to get FaceTime with people as much as possible, because she was just saying like it was so challenging because when you're young and you're not getting the FaceTime with all the higher ups at your company, with all the various stakeholders, like it's just not the same. So yeah, I think it's those like building the reputation, building the network, and then grinding really hard when you have the time to do it, right? Yeah, and the energy. So yeah.
Great. I wanted to open it up a bit. Let's take some questions before we go into what Andrea is doing currently. Is there any questions?
Jason.
Andrea, thank you so much. That's very, I learned more about you every time.
Oh,
This was,
thanks.
this was fantastic. I'm interested to know, when you talk about the roller coaster, there's the stress, both the good and the bad stress. What were some of your keys for taking care of yourself through all of that and your family? I mean,
Yeah.
this wasn't just an Andrea show, so.
Right.
How
And
did you
my
manage
kids were
that?
little. I had a 1-year-old when I started.
Oh.
Actually, I had 3 kids. One was a 1-year-old. So like I have actually thought like my nanny, for instance, doesn't get enough credit in my success, right? Because you actually are only as successful as the people that are also helping you out. And then it's funny that the question should come from you, because Osaze and I are part of a group called Leader Impact, and it was actually really helpful because there was a number of people who had been on the roller coaster or were on the roller coaster, and it was a great place where you could really be open and vulnerable, and then also get advice from people who had been there before. So I really do, I'm not just saying that, I really do think that was like critical for me during that time. So yeah.
And of course, kudos to the husband
And also the husband, not just the nanny. That is true. It is true, right?
Yeah.
Like people around you bringing you up to be able to
Yeah,
have that focus is
Mhm.
huge. Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
My name is Bayo, from Maroon Homes. I listened well to you, and I want to ask a question. How has your personality, what has it got to do with your success story? How has it helped
Yeah.
your drive?
It's a hard question because you just like don't necessarily see yourself through other people's eyes, right? But then the funny thing is, like I said, I've become a little more, learned to be more careful. But I think it was partly my directness and my ability to sort of like tell it like it is that I think also was attractive, right? So I think it's funny because sometimes our superpowers can also be our, that's pretty much
Let's
always
not
the
say
case.
downfall.
Yeah, not downfall, but they can also be challenges.
Yeah.
So I think it was that, and then I think just on the technical side, I'm like very determined, and I generally I love to do the academic stuff, but also just dig in really hard and try and so I do a lot of, I think, creative things with the data. If I have limited data, I will get the most out of it that I can, and so I think it's those two things, just like the creativity and the drive to really like get to the answer and the perfectionist sort of do it the best kind of thing also is helpful. So yeah, I think it's those things.
Awesome. Stan, you have a question? Okay.
Way at the back.
Hi, Deb.
Hello. Andrea, how did you, when you said you went and started there originally?
Yeah.
You didn't know the team, the leadership team.
Yeah.
How did you develop and inspire trust among that team?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, I think, and maybe in some ways it was good that we didn't find an asset for a year, because we had a chance to sort of get bond and then also sort of learn how we all work together before we had sort of the real stress. Like, you think it's stressful to not have an asset, but then you get an asset and it's much more stressful. So I think that actually it did end up being positive as well. And so yeah, then I think it's just time spent together, just sort of like grinding through all this stuff that sort of, and then you start to trust other people's technical abilities, you start to be able to know what other people can do. And then sometimes we had to have some hard conversations to sort of clear up some stuff too, right? So I think trying to be open communicators without letting things build up, I think is also pretty critical.
Nice. Okay, I think.
Thank you so much. Then, you did mention that you had, a reputation networking these onshore drilling wells. Do you consider yourself in the long run going to offshore, where the risk is less risky in terms of
Yeah, that's true.
seismic?
Yeah.
Don't you consider that, being, offshore where the risk is minimal?
Yeah.
I make a lot of money there too. I worked, in shell for long.
Yeah.
So I know about oil and gas too.
Yeah.
Drilling, so.
But is there a lot of, there's a lot of capital required for those, right? So is there a place for startups?
It
offshore?
depends on where you're playing from.
Yeah.
Because I'm from Nigeria,
Yeah.
Oil and gas country.
Yeah.
So where we produce burning lights, all the stuff.
Yeah.
So I know a little, I'm vast, in oil and gas.
Yeah.
Don't you look at that area?
Yeah, we kind of
Because,
like,
I've been to Houston,
Yeah.
Rotterdam,
Yeah.
Nigeria.
Yeah.
So I know about oil and gas off OPEC.
Yeah.
Are you looking at that area?
we sort of stayed in the place we knew, right? And actually even the assets that we bought were right near where the assets that they had the first time, although they also were doing some stuff on the East Coast. So yeah, we never really considered stuff that was outside of our Canadian basin. But I think that would have been a bigger step out for us, a bigger learning for sure, but there's always a next time maybe, right? So, yeah.
All right, let me just check something. Thanks. You talked about free cash flow, right?
Yeah.
So was there at any time when you were almost at negative free cash flow? And what do you think was your biggest anxiety?
Yeah, at the beginning, and because you have to drill pad wells, you're putting in a lot of capital before you're getting anything. And then by the time you've tied it in, like your lead time is, I don't know what it would have been, but it can, it could have been like 8 months or so, maybe longer, right? So, and then when we had the technical issues on our first pad, we've now got wells that, you know, super expensive wells that are not anywhere close to what they should be. And so now you've got the added thing where now it looks like that part of your acreage isn't very good, even though you know that it is. And then also trying to sort of mitigate that. So yeah, that was a big stressor. We had, especially because that happened on our very first pad. And then we had to, and then you have to put more capital in to try to fix it too, right? So, so it's like pouring more money after, yeah, it was a rocky start. It was very
Were you scared of your investors?
What's that?
Were you at any time scared about your investors?
Yes, like, I mean, and that's where I say, like, our private equity guys stuck with us in that particular moment, because it was right at the beginning too, so I think they could have been like, okay, this was not, this is not what we signed up for, so we're out of here. So, so I think we never took that for granted, that they sort of like stuck with us, saw the reasons for what had happened, and sort of like, you know, saw that it was not, it sort of had not been in our control, but, you know, we could avoid it going forward. Yeah, they stuck with us, but they didn't have to necessarily.
I guess that's the importance of a process.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah.
So if you have a process laid out, that this process is supposed to create this outcome, right? And we followed the process, you know, it provides more room for accommodations, I
Yeah.
would say, you know. I mean, it doesn't guarantee that, you know, what every other person's reaction would be.
Yeah.
But if everybody agreed, this is the process.
Yes.
And you did follow that process, well.
Yeah, we had to sort of step through what had happened, why it had happened, what we would do to mitigate it the next time, and then I think they actually had this level of trust with us that allowed them to say, we're sticking with you guys even through this. So
How did that level of trust, what do you think you did to earn it?
I think in some ways
I mean,
really open.
Forgetting the
Yeah.
last, what happened before you
Yeah.
joined, I mean, this particular team, what do you
Yeah.
think? How
To
did you
just,
guys
like,
position
not-
yourself to be in favor, to earn that kind of trust in the midst of such adversarial
Yeah.
outcome in your first?
Yeah. I think like we actually really had to like deal with it head on, right? Not try and pretend that the issues weren't as bad as they were, or, you know, sugarcoat over. I think
Just being forthright.
it was painful, but
Yeah.
yeah, just being forthright about what had happened and what we would do differently next time, right? So yeah.
Oh, okay.
I hope I'm not asking for too much.
No.
Okay, so I want to know, or let me start happily. One of the heavy requirements, you know, for entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
is capacity to draw financing.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, at the
Yeah.
commencement of any venture.
Yeah.
So I want to know, and it would also be good and great, you know, to have that. How were you able, you know, to draw investors?
Yeah.
Or maybe I should put it this way, your funding strategies, you know,
Yeah.
when you started.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, that previous exit was huge because, you know, when you have a track record that you've had, and they actually, like, their first deal was really, really good. And so that helped a lot. And then I think being able to, they very rarely have companies that come to them and say, we have this asset ready. So all, you know, I think we kind of like gave it to them on the silver platter, and then we made sure our technical was super solid. And so, and then they had not funded them before, but they, you know, we had kind of been communicating with them all the way through that first year, and a number of other guys. And then we had also the additional challenge of like US private equity did not want to invest in Canada because they viewed the tax situation as really unfavorable compared to their projects down south. so yeah, I think it was a combination of those things, and then maybe, yeah, bringing them an asset that was ready to go, that they, often they have to spend money for a year or two before their teams get an asset. So, I think having that unique, like, it's ready for you, here it is, probably helped a lot.
Doing your homework.
Yeah, and
You
then,
did your homework, you
yeah.
dotted all the i's.
Yeah.
So it was just like, you had a good bow on it.
exactly,
You were giving them a gift.
exactly,
As it were.
exactly.
Here's a
Like, we're
gift.
gonna make this easy for you, as easy as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you brought to the table the credibility of your talent.
Exactly.
Here's
Yeah. Yeah.
technology, here's
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
We
I
have a
guess-
right to say that the Canada economy, because, it's not open up wide. That's why the US, investors are not investing more in oil and gas here.
Yeah.
I
I think that, from what I've seen, I think that is changing. It's gonna continue to change just as we have more access to market, and some of those pipelines, some of the more capacity is opening up. And then I just saw a slide a couple days ago where their basins, really, they have less locations than we do. They are having steeper declines. So I think it is actually looking pretty rosy for Canada on the investment side, or it will start to.
In
But,
Alberta,
yeah.
particularly.
Yeah, Alberta and then probably parts of BC
Montreal,
too.
yeah.
But yeah, so I feel, I'm pretty optimistic, and from what I've seen, others are too, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. And it's funny, because I'm like really sort of not so much in oil and gas this year, because I'm doing the carbon capture, but I'm sort of trying to keep abreast of what's happening. But yeah, I think there's some good news on the horizon as far as that stuff goes.
Great, so that's a good segue
Yeah.
to take us.
There you
go. To what you're doing currently.
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
At any point in time, Andrea has like almost 4 startup ideas in her head. The times I sit to talk with her, I'm like, the way she bubbles over with this blah, 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 and when she's telling you about the startup idea, she's not just describing a nose and a face, she, as it were, she's identified the market, she's tracked down, the pay, and I am like, come on, girl, let's go recruit some teams around your thinking. So, I thought that, Andrea, if you tell us a little bit, just talk about the exciting stuff about what you're doing right now.
Okay.
And then let's take just one startup idea that you have in your head. Okay. And let's all walk through, let's do a small case study and see how we can, activate that and, see where that goes.
Okay.
Okay?
Sounds good.
So tell us what you're doing right
So yeah, I was kind of like not sure what I wanted to do next, and then I kind of got this opportunity with an old colleague that I used to work with to come on and do carbon capture and subsurface characterization for that at Enbridge. So and it's just a really, really fun, really solid technical team, and then it's also just really, it's kind of an emerging industry, and it's sort of fun for my sort of personality to be part of that, because you're sort of part of building it. Like, we're, one of the big parts of carbon capture is just being able to monitor that CO2 plume once you're injecting. And so a big piece of that is the measurement, monitoring, and verification. And so sort of trying new technologies to try and prove that you can effectively monitor without spending the crazy dollars that they thought, that were originally thought to be needed here. So we've tried numerous things that we'll be writing papers on, and that, haven't been tried in this particular way before. So it's really fun, sort of like, it's really fun to be part of sort of building that and building up that knowledge base for all of the other projects and for the industry in general. So yeah, it's been kind of fun.
So when it comes to carbon capture,
Yeah.
That increasingly is a very important conversation to have,
Yeah.
because the social, if this oil and gas has such a huge social deficit,
Yes.
because of the pollution, right?
Yeah.
So supposed to be the remedy, right?
Right, and it's not just oil and gas, so like in our case, it's cement, it'll be
Cement, of
power
course, yes.
generation, chemical processing, you know, there's
So you have
data
this
centers is starting to become a big
data
one, right?
centers, of course.
So
Farms.
the problem is we're actually keep using more and more energy, not going
We're
down,
never
so
gonna go
like
down,
I think, and it's been really interesting because even with the politics, you know, in the States, that, you know, carbon capture, we've noticed, we thought there'd be a major slowdown, there has been a bit, but those projects are still getting improved within the last few months in the States. So carbon capture is it's not going away. And yeah, with things like data centers, our need for it is actually only going up. Yeah.
So I'm trying to see what the economics around carbon
Yeah.
capture is.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because if it's about, cost control.
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
And pollution capture.
Yeah.
You know, well, that's just mitigating downsides.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But what is the true economics for the carbon capture?
yeah. Well, I think if you create like a stable carbon pricing and a carbon market where those things can be traded, then you can start to like, have it become an industry that,
Yeah.
that is attractive. And so yeah, and they are like huge dollars for capital, but then there's also, you have to balance that against the cost of polluting as well, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I think some of that is still getting hashed out. And then, of course, you're always sort of like waiting to see which government you're gonna have and how they're gonna deal with that. So we do still need to kind of like I think a lot of big projects are sort of waiting on that stable carbon, guaranteed carbon pricing so that they can kind of move forward with confidence. Because really what everyone needs is stability, right?
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah.
So carbon capture, the conversation around carbon capture is a big part of the ESG umbrella, right?
Yeah.
And I know from previous reports that the COP, right?
Yeah.
COP.
Yeah.
That you guys
Yeah.
do every year.
Yeah.
They're not particularly impressed
Yeah.
by how industries continue to capture,
Yeah.
and then they go to emerging markets to buy
Right.
to buy credits.
Yes.
They're like, whoa, don't worry, we'll buy credits.
Right.
Do what you gotta do,
Yeah.
and then we'll go buy
Yeah.
credits.
Yeah.
So how is what you're doing trying to? What would be the outcome regarding
Yeah.
that? Because if all the farms and all the data centers just continue to expand,
Yeah.
and we even put some up in
Yeah.
the satellites up and put some data centers up there.
Yeah.
And then we're talking about carbon capture, there really would not be, we would not get to anywhere.
We're not
close.
reducing our consumption,
No.
we're just, yeah.
We're not dressing it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, that is tricky, right? Because, and I think like, for our, like, we are responsible for the carbon sequestration, but then our client, for instance, is cement plant. And cement will always be carbon intensive, no matter, it's not like you can replace it with something else.
No.
It is just carbon intensive. So I think that's a good example of something that really makes good sense for carbon capture, because there's not an alternative. You can't replace it with solar or something like that,
No,
right?
you cannot.
So yeah, I think it is a tricky balance, and I think stable carbon pricing will help with that kind of thing, and then, sort of making it easier to get these projects over the finish line. Have companies having confidence that, that they, and then maybe having rules about how these, these credits get traded, and making sure that, it's equitable, yeah.
Okay, so give us a startup idea.
Okay, so, well, one, I think being at a large company again has been interesting because, so I have a lot of like semi-retired contractors who would sort of do me favors and come in, and super good people who are really skilled, but it's very hard at a large company because you can't just bring people in. They have to do, 2 weeks of onboarding, and you don't have an AV for it, and like onboarding actually, someone who has a separate company can take a crazy amount of time. So, you know, I was thinking like, it would be really interesting to tap into the sort of like highly skilled but sort of semi-retired market, give them like an app where they can say their availability and then be able to sort of like already be pre-onboarded with some of these big companies so that, you know, it's kind of like a teacher sub list, but not quite. So like, I think, especially in our industry, we didn't train young people for a long time because of the downturn. And so we're sort of losing some of the really skilled people. So yeah, I sort of like love that idea of sort of like, you know, letting the semi-retired work in the middle of winter and then go do their, yeah. So yeah, that's.
So did everybody get that idea? Can we just do, how is that gonna happen, you know? Does someone have any, we want to make this idea, do a little case study about how we move that forward.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So for me, yeah, thanks, Osaze. Basically, once there's an idea, I like to frame it.
Yeah.
Carry out an opportunity framing
Yeah.
on it and be very clear. What's the objective, what's the purpose, what's the
Yeah.
end goal,
Yeah.
what are the risks involved.
Yeah.
Then once you have that clarity, then of course you define your short-term goals, your long-term goals, and then you run the economics, because
Yeah.
for every business, I'm only in it for one reason.
Yep.
Probably the socio-economic reason you talked about,
Yeah.
but most times it's about making money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that brings clarity is very important.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really true.
So you,
Yeah.
so your idea is a tech idea.
Yeah.
It's a tech idea,
Yeah.
because you're looking for an app that will integrate the hours of,
Exactly.
of a population who have skills in
Exactly.
a particular aspect. And that would then make them be able to maybe indicate, we can do X, Y, Z.
Here's my skills, here's my availability. Are people even interested in that, right?
Yeah.
Maybe just my few retired friends just do me favors, but they don't, right? So it's like, yeah, are people interested in that? I think companies, I think they would be. But yeah, seeing if there's enough interest to sort of like,
Yeah, that's the Uber of, I'm available to do this work, this high skilled work.
Yeah.
For these kinds of entities.
exactly,
At this particular time.
exactly. And then you charge an hourly rate at which you take like a certain amount. And yeah, I think, yeah, it's the onboarding, like at the large companies, which should be our largest risk probably.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, but then, excuse me, I still think like, that can be like a short-term solution.
Yeah.
There's still like the underlying problem of still, like you said, not having like enough young people trained. So eventually when the semi-retired people become fully retired,
Yeah.
what happens to the next generation of people?
Yeah, well, and is there any way to sort of like combine those groups, right? Where you can kind of have those boomers with the skills, like sort of mentoring or sort of like providing some training and skills to the younger people. Like, yeah, if you can combine that, I think that would be really cool.
So I'm thinking if you have like the younger people working like the large companies you mentioned, and then have like on board the semi-retired
Yeah.
people, you could kind of like have them work kind of like as head of teams,
Yeah,
where you
Yeah.
have the younger people learn directly under them, and then when eventually they move out, the younger people
Yeah.
kind of step in.
Yeah. And I think like I've already seen some of that where some of my retired friends, they don't want a ton of hours, and by next year they don't want to. So it's like, okay, spend the hours that we're hiring you to like take someone here and train them to do the things that you know how to do, right? So there's a great example of something you could use to sort of, move that next generation into that gap. Yeah, that's really great.
but is that something that, generally speaking, that, what problem does that really solve for the big companies?
Yeah, like I know for us, it was like, we have really tight timelines and sometimes we, I need a petrophysicist or something.
Right
And
now.
it is not, yeah, and it's probably
Not
gonna
in
be
10 months.
for, 40 hours or something. So I need it now, and that person is available before the goes away, so for a trip, right? And does no interest in spending 2 weeks doing onboarding training and even then, like, that would be being hired as an employee, which comes with a whole other bunch of expenses and stuff, and then also sometimes they want to make under a certain amount per year too, right? So being able to sort of like track that for their RSP, pull-ups and stuff. So yeah, and I don't know, like that's a need that I've had a lot at this company, and so we've actually ended up subbing to some companies that are doing work for us, having our contractors sub through them. So we've done that multiple times, but our group is a very unique little group that's like going really fast and being really nimble, doing all sorts of different things, and so it's hard to, because you're at a company where you're very unique. You're in a very unique group in a much larger organism. So, people are kind of going like, why do you need this? And who is this person? And why is this important? So it's just, we're just so different than what is around us, that's sort of like sometimes an interesting challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I totally see that.
Yeah.
Any questions? Any challenges? Any? Okay. Okay.
Not a challenge, but I think it's a really cool idea. I like like I have some connections in the oil and gas side, and then what I find is a lot of the companies are getting away from hiring the employees because it comes with the pension, it comes with those funds, so you're seeing mass layoffs. And a lot of times you've got the companies that are contracting out, which we're losing that knowledge transfer, right? So it's such a cool idea to have the ability to transfer that knowledge, but also have a place where you can have a company that you're consulting with that's going to provide all of those things.
Yeah.
There's probably a big group of people that are already in the field. They've already maybe worked at some of these companies, so they have a bit of a track record.
Yeah.
So I think
it's like gig workers and
we
don't really
mean,
have that.
if they have a year contract, maybe they've got some time in the middle to.
Maybe it also brings people in who have been out of the industry for a while too, but who still have
You
those
see that a
skills,
lot,
right?
right? Hey, I got laid off, but now I'm looking for just 3 days a week as
Yeah,
I'm saving
exactly.
for my retirement.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, those are great points.
Interesting. Okay, so is there any regulatory or reason why that may not work? Maybe.
I think.
Would
like,
there be perhaps a challenge around IP or intellectual property?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think.
Maybe confidentiality? Do you see that? as a
Yeah,
challenge?
maybe, because, you might have workers who are working at, at various different competitors,
Conflict, yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So you'd have to have them, sign confidentiality agreements, and you'd also maybe have to sort of have companies be able to say you're excluded from working.
Exclusions.
Yeah, exclusions, I would say, or you can't work in the same area, like spatial area as far
Okay.
as, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I would have thought such compliance issues that wouldn't be forever. I
Yeah,
just left work last year,
Yeah.
after working for Shell for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
For 6 months, I'm not allowed to touch any Shell project anywhere in the world.
we had that too, except, ours was gonna be a year, I think, and it makes it really difficult.
Yeah.
Really difficult. I thought that like they were starting to talk about like getting rid of some of those rules because they're so, they're so
Yeah.
difficult, especially when you're in a small industry where, your hands are really tied, or we had it within a certain radius of our play, but that excluded pretty much everything in Canada, which makes it difficult, so,
Yeah, but after some time, you can work for anyone, you can do
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
You can work for NASA.
Yeah.
If NASA is comfortable,
Yeah.
because NASA is paying, right?
Yeah.
So we are looking at it from the perspective of who will pay,
Yeah.
not so much from the perspective of who has the confidentiality restriction or the exclusivity period. But, if the big entity is gonna let you do be that on their project, where are their protections and all?
Yeah, yeah,
So that would be a great
yeah,
avenue.
yeah.
So I was gonna say, there are existing opportunities now. I know there's a website called Fiverr.
Yeah.
Specifically here in North America, there's another one called Upwork.
Yeah.
Where some of these skills already exist. So I guess my question would be, would you be in competition with Fiverr? Would you be in competition with Upwork, for example? I know Upwork is based in North America, where people who are sort of semi-retired post their profiles, and then they are matched with companies who are looking for such opportunities.
Like I
So
think
have
having
you
it
heard of those?
local, having it local would be, I think, an advantage. Like, I think, for instance, if you're within Calgary Oil and Gas, most retirees I know don't even really know about those websites, and they're not going after it, right? It's almost
They're
like
not
you have to
looking
go
for it.
find them, right? You have to go find them and say, hey, do you want to do this? It's, I think, less the other way around, where they're actively looking for stuff. So I feel like locally, or locally within different jurisdictions, that if you kind of had people with the contacts, I think you would be building something a little bit different, or different enough. Yeah, that's a good point.
Interesting. Okay. Any other question, comment? Okay.
With the carbon capture, is the CO2 being reused?
No, so that is actually, it's a great question, because in some projects it is. There was starting to be a lot of public resistance to that as well. So it's used to sort of increase your recovery of oil in old pools.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, and in most of sort of the new projects, it's just sequestration. So you're putting it down. Usually you're modeling it for 25 years or maybe more, and then you have to monitor it until a closure period, at which time you can abandon you can kind of walk away from it and leave it be, kind of thing. So it's just purely putting it underground. And Alberta actually has some of the best kind of sequestration rates. And we also, I think, because we have a lot of technical skills from oil and gas, and we also have a really good regulatory framework. We're seeing it in a lot of other places where they're sort of trying to build this, like in Ontario and stuff. We're quite far ahead because we already have a regulatory framework that we're just sort of shifting into this new phase. So,
Awesome. Well, I guess that.
Will your model be related to the LNG project in BC? This carbon capture, because I'm trying to figure out how does it work, and how do you attain a stable price market for this carbon?
yeah, I don't think it's related. I don't think LNG is doing any carbon capture. So it's more like individual emitters signing up for, or like a hub where our project is built to be a hub, so it would be taking emissions from various different emitters. And then the carbon market is a much more complicated discussion. But yeah, you kind of need, I think, because the capital involved in these projects is in the billions of dollars, companies will not move forward unless they know that they've got some guarantee that they're going to get at least a base level return out. So it's sort of like building that framework so that companies have the confidence to move forward on those big capital projects.
Well, we're pretty much out of time now. And Andrea, you've been a fantastic speaker. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please can we give her. And thank you for being a fantastic and very engaged audience. So let's